I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM podcast.
Hello and welcome to our discussion on the first day of testing for 2021. We finally get to see some cars going around the track. We get to see them in the daylight and under the spotlights as well, which is kind of nice to see. Coming into Bahrain, we get a nice mix of both, which is actually quite a nice way to start off the season. We're just going to do a bit of a light-hearted discussion about what's going on in testing. I think it's important that we don't look too hard into what's going on, because without knowing what people's testing programs are and how they're approaching their development on their car, there's only so much we can really draw from the results. And obviously a lot of information. There's a lot of eyes on testing with the start of the new season. So we're just going to have a short discussion going team by team, give a few general comments about what we saw from the coverage, and just give a few views that we've got and a few things that we see, a few things that we didn't see. And we'll be starting off in championship order from 2020. They'll be kicking off with Mercedes. So, and then after our general comments. So, Shay, if you want to get us started.
Right, so moving into 2021, we had a couple of changes coming into this pre-season testing. The length of the testing has obviously decreased. We now have got 3 days of running, and that is it. 3 days of running. That's quite short compared to previous years. We're also at the Bahrain circuit instead of the Circuit de Catalunya in Spain. And both of these circuits have different characteristics, which I'll go through and mention a couple of them. Obviously, we've got the temperature difference between Spain in March and Bahrain in March. It's about a 15-degree difference. Spain will be having an average temperature of 10, 15 degrees if they're lucky. And currently in Bahrain, during the day, they're racing at 29 degrees, which is quite considerably different. And also the track layout is completely different as well. In Spain, you can pull quite a few Gs going around some corners. You've got some fast corners, you've got some heavy braking zones, whereas Bahrain's quite forgiving in that sense, and it's not as much focused on the Gs, what the drivers will be pulling. So obviously what the teams usually expect to get out of the car, they can compare to previous years and previous years' data. But this year they're going in completely blind, different track, different weather, different temperatures. I think it's good. I think the change in track is quite good. And actually I'd welcome it, almost a different track to do the pre-season testing every year. But I can't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, it would be nice to have I think I'd prefer it if testing took place at a track that wasn't on the calendar. I do think that Bahrain is a great track, and it does bring up some surprises for testing. It's kind of good that it has a certain few inclement conditions for testing, that makes things a bit more interesting. But I think I'd rather it was somewhere we weren't racing at all, just so that the data doesn't immediately become, you can start simulating most of the race like we've seen with Spain. They do so much testing there that the race becomes quite processional because so much information is gathered. It's important for them to gather information, but we don't want them to gather too much, because otherwise, it almost means that they can simulate entire aspects of the race, which makes it less exciting to watch, even if it's probably better for the teams themselves, because they get a greater sense of where exactly they're going to end up and what their car is capable of. So probably good for the teams, but not quite so good for the spectator, perhaps.
Hopefully with the limited running this year, that only being 3 days, that won't have such a massive impact, because I think we all agree Spain can be quite predictable, but who knows?
So as well as the changes to the actual testing program itself, there's a few changes to the coverage that I noticed. I'm not sure if this is region specific or if I assume it's part of the international feed. There's a couple of changes to the on-screen graphics that we see, which are a very, very important and perhaps not as often talked about aspect of the sport, because Formula One is quite a complicated sport in a lot of ways. I would have thought newcomers find it quite difficult to get to grips with everything that's going on. Unlike a lot of popular sports where the action is happening in one specific place, it's usually where the ball is or, that sort of thing. There's like a specific area of action. Whereas with Formula One, you've got all this stuff going on. There's a lot of information to take in at once. So the on-screen graphics are pretty important. One thing that they have changed that I do rather like is that in the sector timings, there's now a little line that shows how far through the sector they are as they go through the timings, which is kind of neat. We get a sense of sort of where they are in their lap without having to actually look at an actual map of the track itself. And one thing that they have changed for this year that is, I guess, partially the team's fault to some extent. There's only so much that the broadcasters can do about it, which is the similarity of colours between a lot of the teams. Now, if you don't already know who is driving for what team, then you've got AlphaTauri in a dark blue, Red Bull in a slightly less dark blue, Alpine in a even slightly less dark blue, and then you've got Williams in a sort of lighter blue. They're almost indistinguishable on screen unless you've got a massive TV. You've got these tiny little blocks of colours. They're very, very difficult to tell apart. Even the Alfa Romeo and Ferrari colours are a little bit tricky to tell apart. So some better differentiation between the colours might be better, because I can see that being quite intimidating to newcomers.
Especially during a race like commentary as well. I mean, I have massive respect for anyone who tries to commentate a race, but sometimes they get mixed up with drivers and teams. And I can only see that problem getting a little bit worse with the amount of drivers we've had move this year to different teams, and the teams looking so similar. And also, it's on the graphics as well on the top left-hand side, where like you said, you've got all the drivers' names, but the little block of colour next to them, they are different, but they're not too different, are they? So
it's very subtle.
Maybe if they could just stretch them out just a little bit more.
There was also a little chat about, I think I heard a conversation between Crofty and Martin Brundle. They were talking about the sprint races. And if I recall rightly, I think I heard them say that only the top 3 in the sprint races will be given points. They've already mentioned that one of the sprint races will be at Silverstone. We know that that's been confirmed. But the actual points giving is only going to go to the top 3, I think I heard.
Has that been confirmed anywhere from
they were talking
at all, or is that just speculation?
Well, I don't know. It's just what I seem to recall. I think I would have to look it up and see if it's been confirmed by any official sources. But this is just what I think I heard the commentators talking about. If that's the case, obviously I can't say for certain that it is, then I got to say that just makes the whole idea sound even sillier than it already does.
Yeah.
That just benefits the people who are already going to be top anyway. So what is the point in that? But
I guess, the idea is to try and benefit all the teams and give them all like a decent chance. But by only awarding points at the top, you are limiting those points to certain teams. Indeed.
So, but that was just a little bit of chat that was going on. It was interesting that they talked about that. And I suppose the last general comment to make before we get onto the teams is our big sandstorm that we had. Another interesting thing about being in Bahrain.
Yeah, it's quite windy conditions. They were already aware of the wind and how much that's not throwing testing at all, but a different aspect of testing they have to take into consideration. But yeah, at some points yesterday we had quite a lot of sand on the track, and I quite liked it, seeing how the aerodynamics would push the sand out the way, and especially not necessarily in front or behind the car, but to the left and the right, how much that dirty air affects cars side by side. And just seeing how far that sand got thrown, I thought that was quite interesting. It kind of gives you a little bit more of an insight into how the aerodynamics of the car work. And actually, if you're driving side by side with a car, you're still in that dirty air. You're still in that dirty air generating or trying to pass that car. It's not necessarily the dirty air is just behind the car in front of you. It's also to the left and to the right. It is unstable air. So that was quite nice to see. Made for some interesting driving as well. Some slippery surfaces. Most drivers managed it quite well. A couple of them going wide, but yeah, it looked a bit icy, almost wet weather conditions, but without the wet weather.
Yeah, the exact opposite. It was sort of super dry, super dusty. I hate the idea of all that sand going in the cars and on the intakes and stuff. I can't imagine somebody having to get the dustpan and brush out.
I think McLaren had Floviz paint on, and they were talking about, I feel sorry for the guy who's got to clean that Floviz paint and also get all the sand out of it as well. That was, that can't be great.
Well, let's just touch a little bit on each team then, just have a couple of comments about anything to talk about now. Starting, as we said, we're going to do championship order from last year, starting with the defending champions Mercedes. So an uncharacteristically difficult start for the defending champions, which kicked off with some kind of gearbox issue, and it had them stuck in the garage for a very long period of time. And ultimately, they did the fewest number of laps out of anybody on day one.
Yeah.
And were way down the timesheets, which is not what anyone would have expected.
No, we've come from so many preseason tests where Mercedes have been flawless from start to finish, and pushing in the fastest laps, the most consistent laps, most laps throughout the day. That was almost like their personal goal to achieve as many laps as they could each day last year. And we come away from day one with Bottas just setting six
Poor
laps,
Bottas.
which is, he's already started
quite
unlucky.
Off wrong, hasn't he? Like,
I guess is that a risk when you don't go when you opt to go first in the preseason testing. On a side note, may I mention that every other team done a filming day where you're permitted to run the car for 100 kilometers under certain conditions, not at a race pace with special tires in not a Grand Prix circuit. So they get a chance to fire up those engines and work through. Well, if any problems are gonna show, it will be in that filming day. Now, interestingly, Mercedes opted to do their filming day after the pre-season test, and unfortunately, Bottas did an installation lap. They noticed a problem with the gearbox and had to box straight away, and then, like you said, spend a good couple of hours replacing that gearbox. They didn't try and fix it. They replaced it, and then he only got 5 more laps in towards the end of the first half of the day. So really unlucky for Bottas, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not a great start for him, really. And like you say, that is part of the risk that comes with choosing to be the first one out, especially when you haven't done any filming days.
Yeah.
Another thing to point out with Mercedes, of course, we finally got to see their new floor and the changes that they've made. It looks very unusual. It's possibly a sign of another innovation we could see copied, because it's very different to a lot of the other teams' floors in that it has this almost looks like the sort of like crimped edge of a pie or something. It's got these kind of sort of wobbly
it's
bits
like ripple,
along the
isn't
side
it?
of it. Yeah, the sort of rippling effect that's supposed to sort of push. It's supposed to sort of push air underneath the car, perhaps, as it comes across other elements of the bodywork. How exactly it works, I couldn't tell you, but it certainly it certainly looks quite fancy. It's different to a lot of other people's who have a pretty straight edge and are just going for the standard veins and strakes kind of style. So we got to have a look at it, but I can't say I feel any the wiser myself, not being technically minded in that way.
And I don't think we will feel any of the wiser until maybe we see qualifying pace in a couple of weeks' time. But it wasn't all doom and gloom for Mercedes throughout the day. Lewis Hamilton took to the track in the afternoon and managed to complete 42 laps, finishing in P10. P10 means nothing at the moment. Like we're not even I'm only going to say this once. Don't read anything into preseason testing unless you see a car breaking down every single day and doesn't get any testing. That's the only thing you can take away, is almost the reliability. And so Mercedes got 42 laps on for Hamilton and 6 laps for Bottas, and it was a pretty uncharacteristically poor day for them, like you said. Will they be able to make it up tomorrow? I don't know. I do not know.
Move on to from what was a difficult start for one team to what was probably an excellent start for another at Red Bull.
Yes.
Because Verstappen obviously topped the timesheets by the end of the day. It was just Verstappen who was out today for Red Bull. We didn't get to see Perez. But generally a very strong showing for them. They seem to have a pretty strong package that Verstappen was happy with. He was obviously pushing it quite hard. He had a few spins, but ended up topping the timesheets at the end of the day, like I said, and most laps out of everyone as well. So a confident showing for Red Bull.
Yeah, really confident. And Max said at the end of the first day of testing that the car felt very good for the first day of testing. And no driver comes back and says the car feels amazingly and perfect and well balanced, because that's what testing's all about, ironing out all those issues. But Max said the car felt very balanced and very nice to drive after the first day. And that only complements his lap time and his amount of laps he's done. If I was going to have any guesses coming into preseason testing, I'd expect Mercedes to be top of the charts with 138 laps, but Red Bull have come back. And with the reliability issues they had last year, they had a couple. This is a very good sign that they've done 138 laps with very minimal issues.
Well, the word seems to be that Honda have thrown absolutely everything at this final season to really, really bring the power for that car.
It sounds great as well.
It does, yeah. That Honda engine is raspy, isn't it? It's great. And in general, all the engines are much louder when you consider the start of the turbo hybrid era. Everyone was very unhappy with the way those cars sounded when they first came out, because they did seem a little bit wimpy by Formula One standards. And yeah, now they're all sort of loud and raspy, and they do sound great, especially that Honda. Let's go to McLaren then.
Another fantastic start for a team who have had issues in previous years. So, like many other teams, McLaren ran both drivers today, starting off with Daniel Ricciardo in the morning and Lando Norris in the afternoon. Daniel Ricciardo topped the timesheets in the morning. I believe he finished top of the timesheets by midday, the early classification, which was fantastic, and got a respectable 45 laps on the grid. You look back a couple of years, and that was the total of McLaren's laps for some preseason testings, and they've come so far, and it just fills me with joy that they've managed to get to preseason testing and run their car as long and as hard as they have done today. Lando Norris in the afternoon managed to set 45 laps and finished 2/10 behind Max Verstappen, which is a great showing for the new McLaren Mercedes team. Really positive start.
Yeah, we can't help but be. We've literally just been saying how we shouldn't read too much into the timers, but I can't help but be slightly enthused by seeing McLaren so high up the timesheets early on. Maybe just a sign that they're really pushing quite hard, pushing the limits of the car early on. There's also a little bit of interest around McLaren's new diffuser, which seems to have potentially found a neat loophole in the rules. Without going into too much detail, the regulation changes. They sort of limit certain things that you can do with the rear of the car and the diffuser, and the sort of where the strakes can be and how long they can be, and the sort of height of the dividers between the channels and the diffuser and all this sort of stuff. Now, it seems like McLaren have potentially found an interesting solution by sort of changing exactly where those strakes are. There's a sort of theoretical line where you're not supposed to have them go any longer or any lower. But by setting them back, they're sort of technically the same length, but just in a different part of the diffuser. I don't know exactly how it works, if I'm honest, but there seems to be some talk that it's extending the transition of the floor, and thus it kind of circumvents the change in regulations somewhat, because the regulations dictate where the cutoff is, that they can be a certain length, and McLaren have essentially moved that further back or something. Some kind of clever trick that they've changed. There was some talk about this sort of change in the diffuser and the way that it's got taller strakes, but they're just further towards the inner part of the car. They've just kind of moved them further in, basically, as far as I can tell. So some talk about some innovations.
Yeah, they've tried to be clever, and hopefully it pays off. I like to see different teams try different methods and push the rules to the limit. Otherwise, it'd be quite a boring sport. So
it's no fun when somebody innovates in some ways and then the FIA turns around and bans it. I just don't really. They've gone to all this trouble to innovate their way and get people to rise to the technical challenge rather than just banning stuff. I mean, I don't really. I'm not sure I really think that DAS should have been banned myself. That seems a little bit harsh given the amount of innovation there. But never mind. It is done now.
Never mind. Right. So moving on to the new team, Aston Martin. How do they do on the first day, Alex?
Well, it seemed to be generally pretty positive. I believe that Vettel had a very minor issue. He went to the end of the pit lane at one point and they had to kind of pull him back. I didn't really see exactly what happened. Some eagle-eyed people have noticed that the Aston Martin floor has already been adjusted to look a little bit more like the one on the W12. It has some of those slight wrinkles in it that maybe are adapted somewhat from what they've seen from the Mercedes. Who knows? The tracing point lives on, perhaps. We just don't quite know. We obviously got to see the car for real. That's true of all of these cars, of course. We've seen a lot of renders and a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily indicate exactly what the car will look like in real life. We finally got to see that Aston Martin in the flesh, and I must admit it still looks pretty damn good. But otherwise, it seemed to be generally pretty positive for Aston Martin. There's a lot of positive press around them as well, what with the Aston Martin sharing duties with Mercedes for the safety cars as well. So generally a lot of a positive buzz around Aston Martin, which is indicative of the kind of hype they want to have going forward, I suppose.
Yeah, like you said, there's a massive positive vibe around the whole team. And I think sharing the responsibility of the safety car as well just proves that they mean business. They're here to stay. They're here to, put their foot down and make a name for themselves. Interestingly, both Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll ran on some prototype tyres for the session.
Oh, really?
They weren't running on any official Pirelli tyres this year. They were running on prototype tyres for the whole day. So wherever they finish, obviously, again, the whole grid is running different fuel, different tyres, everything. But the Aston Martin group were running prototype tyres for potentially next year. So that's just an interesting thought.
Yeah, there's the other technical thing I think with the um, AMR21 is just some unusual shaping on the rear brake ducts. Again, possibly a
Mm.
reaction to changes at the rear of the car and the regulations. They're just trying to pick out where teams have decided to make their changes and the innovations that they've made. The Aston Martin car seems to show some promise, so we'll just see. We'll just see how it continues. Hopefully, they can also maintain a bit of reliability because that was a bit of a problem for Racing Point. They had a few engine issues, and obviously they have the same engine as the Mercedes, and so perhaps there's a couple of problems they had to overcome there. Hopefully, they can enjoy a bit more reliability. So Alpine, then, don't call them Renault. We obviously only saw Ocon.
Yep.
We didn't get to see Alonso yet. He'll be coming on day 2. Apparently, Alonso was needing more surgery. Apparently, I think I heard he was in need of some further follow-up surgery of some kind following his accident.
I think he's from what I've heard, that he'll be racing the whole year with 2 metal plates in his mouth, which is part of his jaw reconstruction. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much you can look into that. I mean, it's just he's had an accident. He's in
adding
recovery.
Extra weight to the car.
Oh, blimey! But
I hope it's very light. I'm sure they're like titanium or something.
Yeah, I mean, Alpine have said that he's absolutely fine, and he's just going to run with that injury throughout the whole year. But it's Fernando Alonso. But he wasn't on the track today. Esteban Ocon was, and what a great showing! 128 laps. The car's looking very reliable, and if I do say so myself, that livery looks fantastic on track.
It
looked
really
great.
Nice.
It looked great in renders. And I hate to say it, but it's becoming one of my favourite liveries this year because I love the Aston Martin, I love the McLaren, and I love a lot of the liveries, but that one is just, it's striking, it's making a name. I love the blue and the red. I think it looks really well. But yeah, Ocon did a fantastic job on day 1, ran the whole day just by himself, 128 laps. That's it's just over 2 Grand Prix lengths, which is a tremendous amount of running. With very little incident, and his lap times were very close to the top.
Yeah, the other thing with Alpine, of course, is their very bulky engine cover. They have this sizable airbox, and then a really bulky engine cover, which is different to pretty much every other car. Their executive director, I believe. The only thing that's confusing about Alpine is they seem to have about 235 people that are all executive something and director this, and it's not quite clear who is in charge. But there's all this talk about this bulky engine cover, and they seem to be standing by it. It's a technical choice. It works for them, they say. It's all to do with their engine. Obviously, they're the only team running that engine. So they're saying that it works for us. It improves their center of gravity. They seem to be happy with it, and like you say, the showing on track thus far has been pretty positive. So it might look a little bit strange, but if it works, then it works.
Absolutely. Right, moving on to the talk of the town. Last year they had some problems throughout the whole year, and this year they're coming back, hopefully to fight for more points. It's Ferrari, and with the interesting livery, they had an all right day. Very positive start for their Ferrari's testing. They got a fair few laps done. Split their driver profile morning and afternoon. It was Charles Leclerc in the morning and Carlos in the afternoon, both probably getting about 50, 60 laps. So not quite at the top of the charts, but sat quite comfortably in 3rd place for the amount of laps completed throughout the session.
Yes, Sainz finished day 1 in the top 6, I believe. And Leclerc did have a problem. There was some kind of engine issue at one point where there was a red flag after he had to pull over. But yeah, it was kind of quietly confident from Ferrari. I thought there wasn't too much noise other than them just getting on with it. They how did they do for laps compared to everybody else? You know.
So Carlos got 56 laps and Charles got 59 laps. So about 110, between 110 and 120, which is towards the top end. So very, very good start for them.
Yeah, a bit more encouraging for Ferrari. Like you say, we saw the new livery. with the big green logo on it. It sort of looks slightly different in the light, doesn't it? It sort of catches the light a little bit differently. It's slightly better looking green than it was in the images that we saw, I thought.
I'm glad you said that. I tweeted that out the other day, and I'm by no means a fan of what that green looks like, but it looks better in real life on the cameras than it did on any renders we saw, and I'm still not a fan, but it's striking. But like you said in the podcast on their launch, they got everyone talking about that green logo, and it probably won't run much of the season, so it's doing its job. We're still talking about it. Interestingly, Carlos was one of the, well, not many drivers had an off or had a spin in today's session, but Carlos was one of them, and it was just a pirouette. He just lost it in the turn and just had a spin. Twitter went into a meltdown, as you can imagine. Everyone started comparing it to Sebastian's spins, and maybe it's the car. Blimey.
Hamilton spun as well. Hamilton beached his car.
Exactly.
That happened. Was that today or was that yesterday? I can't remember. I think that was today,
that's today. Yeah, we're currently halfway through day 2 testing, and we're recording day 1's findings. So everyone's going to have problems. You can't read too much into it.
Lots of people have
somebody spun.
So
yeah, exactly. I mean, there was sand on the track. Of course, people are going to find it difficult to drive. So everyone just chill out. It's only preseason testing. Let's see how the year goes. But to round up Ferrari's performance in day 1, very consistent and a decent amount of laps with a slight few niggles here and there.
But also the typical bit of sort of Ferrari privacy in that sometimes they're willing to give it up, and other times they will talk much but say little. There was a little bit of chat from Leclerc where he described the car as behaving as expected. But that depends on what they expected. Did they expect the car to be rubbish, and it is, or did they?
If it behaves as like last year, is that what they want?
Yeah, is that what's expected? So, but yeah, quietly confident is what I'd say from Ferrari, and generally the reliability overall, other than that one hiccup with Leclerc, seems to be moving in the right direction. A bit of positivity and a bit further up the timing sheets than certainly a bit more positive than the last testing, perhaps.
Well, talking about positivity, let's move on to AlphaTauri, another great looking car. I have to say, on track, it looks even better than it does on the renders. Pierre Gasly started off with a massive 74 laps at the start of the session, which was absolutely fantastic. The pace was amongst other drivers who are participating at the first half of the day. He was just behind Daniel Ricciardo, who topped the time sheets at the start of the session. So he would essentially be in P2, but again, it's all not relative, but very consistent, lots of laps, no issues. I think it's a really good start for AlphaTauri.
Yeah, again, they too were quite quietly confident with what was going on. We saw them hitting up the timesheets. We also got to see Yuki Tsunoda out for the first time. And it was a lot of, it seemed like a lot of the younger upcoming drivers seemed to be generally quite confident out in testing. Yeah, just to echo your thoughts that I think it's a great looking car. I still think I prefer last year's AlphaTauri livery, but it's still a good looking car. I didn't really pick up on too much technical-wise from AlphaTauri that was different, other than what we would have already talked about in the launch. There doesn't seem to be too much chatter around what they're doing differently. There seems to be more people talking about how small Tsunoda is compared to all the other drivers. That's the only sort of thing that seems to be talked about, the fact that he's quite short. And to be fair to him, he's sort of owned it a little bit.
Oh, he does. Yeah, if you follow him on social media at all, he's constantly commenting on the official F1 Instagram account, asking where he is in some photos because he's quite short. But he's like you said, he's owning it like he's owning that AlphaTauri at the moment. Yeah. Very similar pace to Gasly. Very consistent laps. Very small mistakes, if any. I didn't see any mistakes from Yuki throughout the whole session. So a really good start, and I know that continues. So. It's a really good start for AlphaTauri. Okay, then. So then another Alfa, and Alfa Romeo this time. They had the second highest number of laps overall. They were really putting it round quite a lot. Again, I'm going to have to use these words again. Again, quietly confident. It looked like a strong showing overall. Giovinazzi was pretty high up the timesheets, and they seem to be keeping. They seem to be more or less within a similar window to Ferrari in a lot of ways, actually. Yeah. That was kind of the impression that I got from a lot of their timings. They were in a similar window. Now, again, a lot of this depends on how they're going about their testing schedule,
when they put all those big, in the garden fence thing that they put on the back of the car. I think they have to drive quite carefully with those on because they're probably quite easy to break. I mean, they're not like parts of the car that are necessarily designed to withstand a lot of
interestingly, laps. Bottas gave a press statement at the end of the day, and he said the 6 laps he did do was with the raking on, and you can't push, you can't really run over the curbs, you don't really want to be throwing it too hard into any corners. It's there to measure the aerodynamics in like a normal environment. So that's just a little bit of information for you. They can't push while they got that raking on.
Yeah, so that in itself can change the way that they might go around. But yeah, timing wise, they looked in a somewhat similar window to Ferrari at times. And I suppose it's also worth mentioning that it's nice to see Raikkonen out there with a Raikkonen and a Schumacher.
Yeah,
on track together.
Blimey.
It's funny to think that Raikkonen will have raced with Michael as well. So
that's
generations
crazy.
collide.
Yeah, what a nice little indent there. I quite like that.
But otherwise, not too much to say about Alfa Romeo for day one, I don't think.
No. So should we move on to Haas?
Yes.
So there wasn't many teams who struggled in the first day, Mercedes being one of them. Haas had a couple of issues. They didn't complete anywhere near as many laps as I imagine they wanted to. So Nikita went out in the Mick went out in the morning, had some issues with the gearbox and had to box, and that was his running finished after 15 laps, which is unfortunate. And Nikita managed to pick that up in the afternoon and do 69 laps. So they got a decent amount of laps in the afternoon. But Haas, they're done a struggle this year because they're not developing their car after preseason testing. We already know that's not going to happen. They've got 2 rookies in the car as well who really need to spend as much time on track as possible. They want to put as much fuel into that car and get them to do as many laps as possible just to feel comfortable in the car. It's all well and good doing simulator work, but this is where the money's made on track. So I feel sorry for Mick at the moment, who's been limited to 15 laps. It's just, I mean, you feel sorry for Bottas, who's only done 6, but he's been in Formula 1 for a fair few years. Mick hasn't, so that's really done a sting. Hopefully they can pick up their game throughout the remaining 2 days, and he can get a good stint in, because that's the problem with 3 days of testing. If you have any issues at all which require a significant change, you've lost a session.
Yeah, timing-wise, they definitely looked, again, their sort of general window, again, testing dependent, but the general timing window seemed to be slower than certainly slower than Williams, and definitely slower than Alfa Romeo, I thought. They struggled with the gearbox, as you mentioned. Yeah, it's going to be a tough year. I must say, I think that car looks great. I really like the look of that car. I honestly do not care about those Russian flags. I think it looks great.
The livery
looks really
is
nice.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So nice to see that car in the flesh. Glad to see that they got it up and running, because obviously we didn't actually see the real car at the launch. They just sort of rolled it out the garage when it was time to start testing, and start up it did, and out and they got going. So at least they did. There was some positivity in the way that they got started. But yeah, going to be a difficult year for Haas. At least they're going to look good whilst doing it.
Yep. They've just got to suck up this year, unfortunately, and put all their money and efforts into next year, where hopefully both their drivers have learnt a lot and will be better going into the future. We've already seen with Latifi how much he's improved over the course of a couple of years in Formula 1, and I'm sure we'll see the same with Nikita and Mick moving forward.
That just leaves Williams then. Now, unusual first day for Williams, I thought, because they didn't put either of their race drivers in the seat. We saw Roy Nissany, who is their reserve driver. I thought that was a bit of an interesting choice, really.
Given the limited number of days we've got with testing, each session is a couple of hours. I mean, you've got 2 sessions a day and 2 days remaining. It just really threw me. It would make perfect sense if we had 10 days or 2 weeks of preseason testing, but we don't. We have 3 days, and to chuck a test driver in there, I thought that's brave. I couldn't imagine why they would want to do that. Maybe, I have no idea. It really puzzled me.
Maybe it's something about the kind of feedback that Nissany gives. Something to do with that, or they really wanted to just give their development driver a bit of time on track. Maybe they don't get many other chances to do that. It's hard to say. But an interesting choice, like you say, with such limited running. You'd think they want to get their race drivers in there, get some feedback on the car straight away. But especially when, as we've covered during the launch reaction, Williams have already decided to come straight out with the bold change, and we're not going to wait until the regulation change. Here we are, we're gunning straight for a new start straight away, even before the development. So yeah, an interesting choice.
Yeah.
Did your feelings on the Williams livery change, seeing it in the flesh?
No, not at all.
No, me neither.
It still looks awful, and I hate to say it because I love the team and I love what they stand for, but I just, it just doesn't look very good. And since we've discussed it, someone's actually gone onto the F1 mobile game app and gone through the pre-selected liveries. And if you put in various types of blue, you almost get an identical render to what they've got in real life. It doesn't look good in daylight. It doesn't look good in the spotlights. But what does look good is the 83 laps Roy managed to complete in a day. Now, Williams have struggled in the past to turn up on time to pre-season testing and get a car together. So to turn up, to start up, and to do 83 laps in a day's worth of testing, I think that's massive. That's the statement. That's a statement its own, that they've come out, and they've had very little reliability issues as well. In fact, I don't know if they had any reliability issues because I grazed over testing. I wasn't going to watch all 7 or 8 hours. So I've watched highlights, I've watched the bits and read some articles. But I don't think they had any issues at all. So that's a great start for the team.
Yeah, likewise, my opinions on the livery didn't really change. I still think it's a bit confused. There are some kinds, the occasional angle where you're like, it doesn't look too bad. And then it turns out, oh no, it's a complete mess. So
Yeah.
I can't say my feelings on it have changed too much. It's a bit of a very, very confused by it all. But like you say, that's not really the important thing. The important thing is that they are much more positive looking at it here. The word from the team seems to be a lot more positive. I know that Simon Roberts was talking about how the general, putting together of the car and getting it ready for testing was very easy compared to previous years. They didn't have as many issues. They also say that there's a lot that's different about the car. Obviously, we don't know everything that's different about it, but
yep, the livery.
The livery is very different. But there's it seems that a lot of investment has been put into the in-house equipment and facilities that they have. Obviously, a lot of that investment from Doralton and the like will have helped immensely. And that support will presumably make the sort of support for the car, and putting it together has made it a lot easier according to the team. So aside from our opinion, the messy livery, the rest of it seems to be very well put together and is much more positive.
We did have a question from RPM legend Dave Doherty. At the end of every day, I'll put out a tweet. Any questions you want us to answer on the podcast, and we shall. We've kind of covered this already, but his question was, what was your opinion on Mercedes' technical problems? And do you think it will hinder them going forward? Now, it's unusual, don't get me wrong, it's unusual to see such a flawless team have significant issues on the first day. I'm talking about the gearbox and the lack of running for Bottas, and Hamilton seemingly struggled with the balance of the car. He was probably one of the most drivers who had a lot of offs and spun a couple of times and really struggled to get it slowed down going into turn 1. Again, wind conditions, sand on the track, and getting used to a whole new aerodynamic and downforce philosophy. Kind of, it might take some getting used to. I don't know whether they'll have any issues. I've not watched today's testing, so we're currently recording this on day 2, and I've not watched any of day 2 yet. So I don't know if Mercedes will have any more problems. I'd like to think they'll get on top of them, but it was definitely an unusual start for the team, which has been perfect over the last couple of years.
Yeah, when you compare it to previous years, I'm pretty sure that on day 1 of testing for 2020, both Mercedes topped the timesheets on day 1. So it's uncharacteristic. If anybody can overcome it, you'd think it would be Mercedes. And I think there's a lot of other factors at play, but it's important to note that it seems that all of the other teams haven't really been foiled by as many of those issues, whereas Mercedes have. Does this spell the end of their likely dominance? There really is no way to tell. Like I say, if anybody can deal with it, it's Mercedes. It's uncharacteristic. We just have to wait and see what happens over the rest of testing. And yeah, I think it will be good if they can get, especially Bottas, can get a few more laps in and get a bit more confidence going in that car. But there's been some talk about looking like a bit of instability at the rear end, and that possibly there might have been some struggles with dealing with the regulation changes, but we'll see. Still a lot that remains to be seen, and we'll see. We'll see how Mercedes go moving forward. Thanks for the question, Dave. Much appreciated.
So there we have it. Day one of pre-season testing is wrapped up. 1/3 is complete. We're going to be racing in no time. It's literally 2 weeks away and I cannot wait. So what did you think of day one? Do you think Mercedes are in trouble? What do you think of the Williams livery? Let us know below. Obviously, we've seen all these cars on track now. Some look better on track, some don't. Have we missed anything? Send us your thoughts or questions to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter, or you can get in touch with us at RacePerMinute.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or a like. And if you like what we do, please consider subscribing for more wherever you get Race Per Minute. And if you really want to support the show, help us keep the quality content coming and receive some lovely rewards by donating as little as £1 a month at patreon.com/RacePerMinute. We'll be back tomorrow for day 2 of pre-season testing. Hopefully more interesting things to talk about.
Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you then.